Tragedy in West Canoga Park. Judith Barsi was 10 years old and one of the most recognizable child voices in Hollywood when her father killed her in the early morning hours of July 25, 1988, at the family home in West Canoga Park, Los Angeles. She had not arrived at that house suddenly or by accident. Judith had grown up there, in a neighborhood of quiet streets and mid-century homes, raised by her Hungarian immigrant parents, Maria and Josef Barsi. Her mother had pushed her toward the entertainment industry young, spotting her natural charm when she was just a toddler, and Judith had taken to it with an innate skill that stunned casting directors. She appeared in commercials first, stacking up over 70 television spots for major national brands, then small television roles, then film. By the mid-1980s, she had racked up credits that most adult actors never reach in a lifetime of trying. She appeared in the intense television miniseries Fatal Vision. She had a role on location in Jaws, The Revenge, playing the granddaughter of Chief Brody's character. She provided the voice of Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven and the voice of Ducky in The Land Before Time, two massive animated productions that would go on to be seen by millions of children around the world across subsequent generations. Neither film had been released yet when she died. Judith was, by the accounts of directors and producers who worked with her, a natural. She took direction well, possessed an uncanny ability to memorize entire scripts effortlessly, and stayed focused during long days of filming. She was professional on set in ways that surprised people given her age, frequently outperforming her adult peers. She had been under contract with multiple major studios, bringing in an income that allowed her family to purchase their suburban home. Her career was, by any measure, ascending toward permanent stardom. At home, the situation was different. Josef Barsi had a history of erratic, deeply abusive, and threatening behavior that had been documented by local authorities and repeatedly reported. His alcoholism fueled regular bouts of extreme paranoia. People in the industry who knew the family were aware of it. Industry friends noted Judith shaking and plucking out her own eyelashes from chronic stress. Reports had been made to Child Protective Services prior to the murders, prompting active case reviews. The records of those contacts existed, showcasing a clear paper trail of systemic failure by local intervention infrastructure. The household had not been a stable one for some time, and those closest to Judith had understood that something was terribly wrong, yet legal barriers and institutional delay kept her trapped. On the morning of July 25, 1988, Josef Barsi shot Judith and her mother Maria inside the family home while they slept. Both were killed instantly. Josef then spent the next 2 days lingering in the house before dousing the bodies in gasoline and setting fire to the structure. He was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the garage. Emergency services responded to the West Canoga Park address after the fire was reported by neighbors who saw smoke rising from the roof. Firefighters and law enforcement arrived to find the house burning violently from the inside. When the fire was brought under control and investigators entered the scorched remnants of the interior, they found the bodies of Judith and Maria Barsi in their respective bedroom. Josef was also found dead at the scene. The investigation confirmed the sequence of events with grim precision. Josef Barsi had shot both his wife and his daughter, set the fire deliberately to destroy the physical evidence of his crimes, and then died by his own hand. The deaths of Judith and Maria were confirmed as homicides. The cause of death for Judith Barsi was a gunshot wound to the head. Judith Barsi was 10 years old. Both All Dogs, Go to Heaven and The Land Before Time were released after her death, and both became beloved films. She never saw either of them. Josef Barsi was found dead at the scene from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Catastrophe on the film set. In the early morning hours of July 23, 1982, on a stretch of riverbank in Indian Dunes, California, a film production set up for a nighttime shoot would kill 3 people, including 2 children, before the sun came up. The production was Twilight Zone, the movie, a Warner Brothers anthology film based on the classic television series. The segment being filmed that night was directed by John Landis and involved actor Vic Morrow, portraying a character moving through a time travel sequence meant to represent a Vietnam War environment. The location was along the Santa Clara River in the community of Indian Dunes, a patch of terrain that had been used for film and television shoots before because of its rugged, isolated landscape. The environment was flat and open along the riverbank, with enough space for the camera equipment, massive pyrotechnic setups, and the vintage military helicopter that was central to the scene's choreography. Vic Morrow was 53 years old. He was a working actor with a long career, best known at that point for his starring role in the television series Combat, and he was a recognizable presence to audiences who had grown up with that show. He had been hired for the Twilight Zone segment and had been on location for the high-intensity shoot, expressing slight trepidation about the safety of the stunts to his personal friends prior to filming. The 2 children present that night were Micah Dinlay, age 7, and Renee Shinyichin, age 6. Both had been brought onto the production to appear in the scene alongside Morrow, playing village children whom his character was rescuing from an attack. Their presence on set at that hour, in those hazardous conditions, was later confirmed by investigators to have directly violated California child labor law. The children had been hired without the proper state permits, and without the legal protections those permits required. No teacher or welfare worker was present on set. The approvals required to have children working at that time of night had not been obtained, and the production paid them under the table to bypass union scrutiny. A helicopter was positioned as part of the shot. The aircraft was piloted by Dorsey Wingo, a veteran commercial pilot. Pyrotechnic explosions had been planned as part of the sequence, designed to simulate a heavy bombing run for the scene. The helicopter was to fly low over the set, buffeted by simulated mortar fire, while the explosions detonated around the actors below. At approximately 2:20 in the morning, the heavy explosives were detonated. The helicopter was flying low over the set during the detonation sequence. The pyrotechnic explosions went off in close proximity to the aircraft, generating a massive wall of heat and debris. The helicopter's tail rotor was engulfed and severely damaged by the pyrotechnic explosions, causing it to fail and leading to a total loss of directional control. The aircraft lost control. The helicopter came down hard into the shallow riverbed. The main rotor struck Vic Morrow and Micah Dinlay, decapitating them instantly. Renee Shin Yi Chen was struck and crushed by the helicopter's heavy landing skid as it slammed into the mud. All three died at the scene. Emergency responders arrived at Indian Dunes within minutes. The production had collapsed into chaos, with crew members scattered and screaming. The three bodies were recovered from the water. There was nothing that could be done for any of them. The injuries each had sustained were catastrophic and not survivable. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted an investigation into the crash, pointing out severe communication failures between the director and the pyrotechnics crew. Criminal investigations were launched simultaneously by Los Angeles authorities. The illegal employment of the two children was confirmed and became central to the prosecution's case. Director John Landis and 4 other individuals connected to the production were charged with involuntary manslaughter. The trial lasted through 1987, becoming a media sensation. John Landis and all 4 co-defendants were acquitted by a jury who viewed the event as an unpredictable accident. In the years following the crash, California significantly strengthened its laws regarding the employment of child actors on film sets, tightening restrictions on the hours during which children could work, the conditions under which they could be present, and the independent regulatory oversight required. New safety standards for pyrotechnics were enacted across the industry. Vic Morrow, Micah Dinlay, and Renee Shin Yi Chen were pronounced dead at the scene on July 23, 1982. The cause of death for all 3 was the result of the helicopter crash. Micah Dinlay was 7 years old. Renee Shin Yi Chen was 6 years old. Career ended young. Bobby Driscoll was the first child actor placed under contract by Walt Disney Studios, and he spent the final years of his life unrecognized and unidentified in New York City, where his body was discovered in an abandoned building in March of 1968. Driscoll had been born on March 3, 1937, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. His family relocated to California when he was young, and he found his way into the film industry as a child due to his expressive eyes and natural delivery. His career through the late 1940s and early 1950s was, by the standards of any era in Hollywood, remarkable. He appeared in Song of the South. He starred in Treasure Island as Jim Hawkins. He received an Academy Juvenile Award in 1950, one of the most prestigious honors the industry gave to child performers following his performance in the suspense film The Window, and he provided the voice and the physical performance used as reference for the title character in Disney's animated feature Peter Pan, released in 1953. Disney had seen something in Driscoll that was worth investing in heavily. He was their first contracted child actor, and for a period in the early 50s, he was one of the most visible young performers in American film, celebrated for his talent by Walt Disney himself. The years after Peter Pan did not go the same way. The roles he had been given as a child depended on his being a child, and as he grew older and hit adolescence, his skin broke out, and the industry's interest faded overnight. Disney dropped his option contract in 1953. Adult roles did not come in the same volume, or with the same prestige. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, his professional footprint had shrunk considerably. He had left California completely. He had moved through periods of documented instability, including heavy substance abuse and drug-related arrests in California that became part of the public record. Eventually, he made his way to New York City to join the underground art scene, where he lived largely off the radar of the entertainment world that had once featured him prominently. In March of 1968, 2 children playing in an abandoned tenement building in the East Village came across a body lying on a cot. They notified adults, who called the police. Emergency services were called to the building. Investigators arrived to find the body of a man surrounded by empty bottles with no identification on his person. There was nothing at the scene to indicate who he was. The medical examiner's office processed the case as an unidentified individual. The cause of death was confirmed by the medical examiner as hardening of the arteries, a condition known as arteriosclerosis, with heavy drug use documented in his history. Because he had no identification, he was not immediately matched to any missing persons report. Standard procedure at the time required that fingerprints be taken from unidentified deceased individuals. This was done, but the match was not made quickly due to bureaucratic backlogs. The body of Bobby Driscoll was buried on Hart Island in the Pauper Cemetery maintained by New York City, in an unmarked communal grave. His family had reported him missing, searching for him for months. It took over a year before the fingerprints on file were cross-referenced by chance, and the identification was finally made. His mother was notified through the New York City Welfare Department late in 1969. The man who had won a Juvenile Academy Award, who had voiced one of Disney's most enduring animated characters, had been in a pauper's grave for more than a year before anyone knew it was him. The exact date of Bobby Driscoll's death was not confirmed. The body was discovered in March of 1968. He was 31 years old. The cause of death was confirmed by the medical examiner as arteriosclerosis, a tragic overdose. Anissa Jones was 18 years old and had spent most of her adolescence trying to exist outside the identity that had made her famous when she was found dead at a friend's house in Oceanside, California on August 28, 1976. She had been born on March 11, 1958, and had come to national attention in 1966 when she was cast as Buffy on the television series Family Affair. The show ran on CBS and became one of the more watched programs of its era. Anissa played the youngest of 3 children in the central family, and her character, along with her trademark cloth doll named Mrs. Beasley, became familiar to households across the country, generating massive merchandising profits. She was 8 years old when the show began. Family Affair ran until 1971. For 5 seasons, Anissa Jones was one of the most recognized child faces on American television. The show was not a small production. It was a major network series with a significant audience, and her role was central to its cultural footprint. When Family Affair ended, Anissa was 13. The transition that awaited her was not easy, and the years that followed the show's cancellation were documented as a difficult, deeply turbulent period. Her parents' marriage had ended in divorce, and custody arrangements became a source of ongoing legal and emotional conflict. She had grown up in front of cameras and audiences, and the life waiting for her outside that was different from anything she had known during the years when the show was running. She effectively withdrew from acting after the show ended, rejecting scripts, and did not pursue a sustained return to the industry. By the mid-1970s, she was spending time in Southern California beach communities, away from Los Angeles, associating with a crowd involved in local drug culture. On the night of August 28, 1976, she was at a party in Oceanside, consuming various illicit substances. She was found unresponsive in a bedroom. Emergency services were called by partygoers. Responders arrived to find Anissa Jones unconscious and completely unable to be revived. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner conducted a toxicological examination to determine the exact cause of the collapse. The results confirmed the presence of multiple substances in her system at the time of death. The toxicology identified cocaine, phencyclidine, quaaludes, and seconal. The combination and concentration of substances present was the cause of death. The medical examiner ruled the death an accidental acute drug intoxication. No note was found. There was no evidence presented at the time of investigation that her death had been intentional. The ruling remained accidental. Anissa Jones was pronounced dead on August 28, 1976. She was 18 years old. The cause of death was acute drug intoxication confirmed by toxicological examination. Tragedy in Oklahoma. Dana Plato had spent the day of May 7, 1999 on the radio, and she was found dead the following morning in Morrow, Oklahoma, at the home of her fiancé's family. She had been born on November 7, 1964, and cast as Kimberly Drummond on the NBC sitcom Different Strokes when she was 13 years old. The show premiered in 1978 and ran until 1986. Different Strokes was one of the most prominent sitcoms of its era, watched by large audiences and built around a premise that gave its young cast consistent national visibility. Plato appeared in the show for most of its run, and her face was recognizable to millions of viewers who watched the series through its network and syndication broadcasts. The years following Different Strokes were widely documented as a period of sustained difficulty. She faced severe financial problems, compounded by the theft of her earnings by her accountant that became public knowledge. In 1991, she was convicted of robbery in Las Vegas after an incident at a video store involving a pellet gun, a conviction that generated significant press coverage and reinforced a public narrative about the trajectory of her life since the show. She remained a figure that the media returned to periodically, usually in the context of what had gone wrong. On May 7, 1999, Dana Plato appeared on The Howard Stern Show. The broadcast was a nationally syndicated radio program with a large audience. Her appearance that day was noted by those who heard it, as she faced a barrage of critical calls from listeners who doubted her sobriety. She spoke about her life and career, claiming she was entirely clean. Whatever her condition was during the broadcast, the appearance became a reference point in the days and weeks after her death, discussed by journalists and commentators who had heard it. She traveled to Morrow, Oklahoma, where her fiancé's family lived. She was staying at the family home inside a motorhome parked on the property. The following morning, May 8, 1999, Dana Plato was found unresponsive by her fiancé. Emergency services were called to the residence. Responders arrived and found her unable to be revived. She was pronounced dead inside the vehicle. The medical examiner examined the case and ordered a toxicological analysis. The toxicology returned results confirming the presence of Vanadom, which is the brand name for carisoprodol, a prescription muscle relaxant, and Vicodin, a prescription pain medication. The concentration of substances present was identified as the cause of death. The medical examiner officially ruled her death a suicide, determining that the lethal concentration of prescription drugs in her system was the result of an intentional overdose. Dana Plato was pronounced dead on May 8, 1999. She was 34 years old. The cause of death was acute drug intoxication from prescription medications, confirmed by toxicological examination. Violence at night. Freddie Prinze was 22 years old, one of the most successful comedians in the country, and the star of one of NBC's top-rated sitcoms when he shot himself at his Los Angeles apartment on January 28, 1977. He had been born Frederick Carl Prutzel on June 22, 1954. In New York City. He grew up in Washington Heights and developed his comedic voice early, performing stand-up in New York clubs as a teenager. By the time he was 17, he was working professionally as a stand-up comedian. By the time he was 19, he had been cast as Chico Rodriguez on Chico and the Man, a sitcom that premiered on NBC in 1974 and immediately became a hit. The show ranked among the highest-rated programs on American television in its first season. Prinze was paid at a level that reflected that success, and by his early 20s, he was one of the highest-earning performers in network television. He was also, by multiple documented accounts, struggling under the weight of sudden fame. His use of various substances, particularly methaqualone, had been noted by people around him. He had spoken to associates about his emotional state, his ongoing battle with severe depression, and his fear of professional decline in ways that those people later described publicly. The period of late 1976 into early 1977 was not, by the accounts available in the record, a stable one, exacerbated by a pending divorce from his wife. On the night of January 28, 1977, Freddie Prinze was at his apartment in Los Angeles. His business manager, Marvin Snyder, known to those around him as Dusty, was present at the apartment, having arrived to comfort the distressed star. At some point during that night, Prinze pulled out a gun and shot himself in the head. Snyder was present when the shot was fired, witnessing the act. He called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived at the Los Angeles apartment. They found Prinze with a catastrophic gunshot wound to the head. He was alive when they arrived. Emergency medical personnel worked on him at the scene to maintain respiration and then transported him to UCLA Medical Center. At UCLA Medical Center, Prinze was placed on life support. The medical team worked to stabilize him, but the nature of the injury he had sustained left virtually no possibility of cognitive recovery. He remained on life support through the night and into the following day while family gathered. A note was found at the apartment. Its existence was confirmed and became part of the police investigation and subsequent civil legal proceedings. Freddie Prinze was pronounced dead on January 29, 1977, after life support was removed. He was 22 years old. The coroner's initial ruling was self-unaliving. His mother contested that ruling in a civil legal case, arguing that his documented substance use at the time had impaired his capacity and that the act should not be classified the way it was. In 1983, a jury found that the death had been accidental rather than intentional, driven by medication-induced delirium. Lost to disease, Heather O'Rourke was 12 years old, had already completed her third major film, and had been misdiagnosed with a condition she did not have when she collapsed at her home in Lakeside, California on the morning of February 1st, 1988, and could not be revived. She had been born on December 27, 1975. She was discovered by Steven Spielberg at an MGM restaurant when she was 5 years old. He brought her to the attention of the production for Poltergeist, the 1982 MGM horror film that would become one of the defining defining supernatural films of its decade. Heather was cast as Carol Ann Freeling, the youngest child in the family at the center of the story. The film was released in 1982 and became a significant commercial and cultural success. Her performance was widely noted. Her face and her voice became associated with the film in a way that extended well beyond the production's initial release. She returned for Poltergeist 2, The Other Side in 1986, and then for Poltergeist 3, which filmed through 1987. By the time she completed her work on Poltergeist 3, she was 11 years old. The film was in post-production and not yet released. In the period leading up to her death, Heather had been experiencing symptoms, including severe abdominal pain and physical swelling, that prompted medical attention. She had been examined and received a diagnosis. The diagnosis given was Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory bowel condition, and she was prescribed heavy cortisone treatments. That diagnosis was incorrect. The condition she actually had was a congenital stenosis of the intestine, a narrowing present from birth that had gone undetected. The two conditions can present with overlapping symptoms, but the treatment paths are completely different, and the consequences of the misidentification would become apparent on February 1st, 1988. That morning, at the family home in Lakeside, California, Heather became suddenly and severely ill, her hands turning blue. She collapsed. She stopped breathing. Her family called emergency services. Paramedics were dispatched to the Lakeside residence. They arrived to find Heather unresponsive and worked to stabilize her at the scene. The situation required more intensive medical equipment than the responding unit could provide on location. She was transported to community hospital in El Cajon. The severity of her condition became clear upon arrival at the El Cajon facility, where the medical team determined that her needs exceeded what they could provide for this case, prompting her to be airlifted from community hospital to Children's Hospital in San Diego. The team at Children's Hospital, coordinating with UCSD Medical Center, moved her into emergency surgery. The procedure was aimed at addressing the underlying condition that had caused the collapse. The surgery was not able to save her, as the internal damage was too extensive. Heather O'Rourke suffered cardiopulmonary arrest. She died on February 1st, 1988. The medical examiner's findings confirmed what the treating physicians had encountered. The congenital stenosis of the intestine had not been identified during her lifetime. The condition had produced an acute bowel obstruction and subsequent septic shock. The Crohn's disease diagnosis had been entirely incorrect. The cause of death was confirmed as cardiopulmonary arrest caused by septic shock, resulting from the undiagnosed congenital stenosis. Poltergeist 3 was released in June of 1988, dedicated to her memory. Heather O'Rourke was 12 years old when she died. Tragedy on the Sunset Strip. Anissa Jones had been the most publicly known child television star to die of substance-related causes in the 1970s, but she was not the only former child performer whose story ended that way. River Phoenix had a career that spanned a different era entirely, and he died outside a nightclub on Sunset Boulevard in the early morning hours of October 31st, 1993. He had been born River Jude Phoenix on August 23rd, 1970. He came from a family that moved frequently during his childhood and had almost no conventional path into the entertainment industry. Yet he found his way in regardless. His early film career showed a range that drew serious critical attention while he was still a teenager. He appeared in Explorers in 1985. He appeared in Stand By Me in 1986. A film that became a generational touchstone and established him as one of the most compelling young actors working in Hollywood. In 1988, his performance in Running on Empty earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He was 17 years old when he filmed it. He continued working through the early 1990s, appearing in My Own Private Idaho, among other independent productions. He was, at the time of his death, 23 years old, and still considered one of the significant acting talents of his generation. On the evening of October 30th, 1993, he was at the Viper Room, a nightclub located at 8852 Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. The Viper Room was co-owned at the time by actor Johnny Depp, and was a well-known venue on the Sunset Strip for musicians and actors. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning on October 31st, 1993, River Phoenix collapsed on the sidewalk outside the club. Witnesses on the street observed him seizing violently on the pavement outside the entrance to the Viper Room. A call was placed to emergency services. The call was made by his brother, Joaquin Phoenix, who described the symptoms in explicit detail. The recording of that 911 call was released publicly and became part of the documented record of that night. Paramedics arrived at the Sunset Boulevard location. They found River Phoenix unresponsive on the sidewalk. Emergency medical personnel worked on him at the scene using advanced life support protocols and then transported him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. At Cedars-Sinai, the emergency medical team continued resuscitation efforts. the efforts were not successful, as his cardiac system had shut down completely. River Phoenix was pronounced dead at 1:51 in the morning on October 31st, 1993. The toxicological examination conducted by the medical examiner identified the cause of death. The results confirmed lethal levels of cocaine and heroin in his system, a combination sometimes referred to in street terms as a speedball. The toxicology also detected Valium, marijuana, and ephedrine. The cause of death was ruled acute multiple drug intoxication. River Phoenix was 23 years old, a career left behind. Jonathan Brandis had been one of the most recognizable faces in teen entertainment during the early 1990s, appearing on bedroom walls in the form of magazine covers and posters, before the industry that had made him famous gradually withdrew its attention, and he was found at his Los Angeles apartment on the night of November 11th, 2003. He had been born Jonathan Gregory Brandis on April 13th, 1976, in Danbury, Connecticut. He began performing as a child, appearing in commercials and television roles in the 1980s. He appeared in the television film adaptation of Stephen King's It in 1990, playing the young Bill Denbrough, a role that introduced him to a wide audience. He appeared in the film Ladybugs in 1992. And beginning in 1993, he was cast as Lucas Wollensack, a teenage scientific prodigy, in the NBC science fiction series Sequest DSV. Sequest DSV was a high-profile production. It was developed with ambitions to bring serious science fiction to a network television audience, and its premiere drew significant viewership. Brandis, as the teenage lead, received an enormous amount of attention from young audiences. Teen magazines featured him regularly and extensively. He had the kind of visibility that comes to very few performers, and he had it while still in his teens. The show ran through 1996, and when it ended, the terrain that had surrounded him began to shift. The roles that had defined him were associated with a specific type of production and a specific moment in his career, and the transition to the next phase of his adult profession proved difficult. The parts he sought did not consistently materialize, and his scenes in the film Heart's War were cut prior to release. The industry that had placed him on magazine covers moved its attention in other directions. By the early 2000s, his professional situation was not what it had been during the Sequest years. People who knew him during that period later described in interviews and in public statements an individual who had struggled deeply with the experience of watching his career recede, showing signs of clinical depression. Those accounts are drawn from personal recollections, not official records, and the specific details of what he experienced in that period cannot be verified through official documentation. On the night of November 11th, 2003, Jonathan Brandis was found at his apartment in Los Angeles by his friends. He had chosen to leave on his own terms. Emergency services were called immediately to the location. He was transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He did not recover from his injuries. Jonathan Brandis was pronounced dead on November 12th, 2003. He was 27 years old. The cause of death was injuries sustained from hanging. No note was confirmed in the official public record. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.